Hi, good evening. My name's Simon, and this is Little Hills Thursday night Bible study. We're continuing on in our theme of little people in Paul's letters. And tonight we're going to be looking at the person of Tychicus. And Tychicus, you may not have heard that name before. He does appear 5 times in the New Testament, 4 in Paul's letters and once in the book of Acts. So we're going to be looking at Tychicus tonight, and even though not a lot is said about him in the New Testament, we're not given a great detail about him, there is enough to gain some from what Paul does tell us about him. But you know, when you read the end of Paul's letters, he often tells you about the people that accompany him in his ministry, that are useful to him in his ministry, that he tells the churches about. And this is important because we cannot do ministry by ourselves. We need others to help us. And this is the way God, in fact, created us. He created us to be in fellowship with other people, to look and seek others for help. Because if you go back to the opening book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, when God creates Adam, it's a bad thing that Adam is alone. God said it is not good that the man is alone. That's in Genesis 2:18. That's obviously before the end of day 6 of creation, because God declares everything very good at the end of day 6. And the reason it's not very good is because Adam is by himself. Eve hasn't been formed yet or built from Adam's side. And God actually created Eve to be Adam's helper, to be the one who would come along beside him. Adam needed Eve. And you see this also through the rest of Scripture. If you think about Moses actually got in trouble at one point for trying to do too much by himself. And so God raised up others within the leadership of Israel to be helpful to Moses. In fact, if you think about the famous battle that Moses had with the Amalekites in Exodus chapter 17, it's Joshua who goes out and fights for the people of Israel as the leader of the army, but Moses is there. And while Joshua's fighting, Moses is with Aaron and Hur, and they uphold Moses' arms while Joshua is fighting the Amalekites. And so Adam, Moses, and other great people in the Bible couldn't do things by themselves. They were given people in their lives to help them in their ministry. And that's with the Apostle Paul. Paul had people to help him in his ministry, just as we today, we need people to help us in our ministry for the Lord. We cannot do it by ourselves. We need others to help us, because when we try and do it all by ourselves, we tend to come unstuck. And the task is too big for us anyway to do by ourselves. But Paul often talks about these people in his letters. And as I said, Tychicus is one of these. He's mentioned 5 times, once in the book of Acts and then 4 times in Paul's letters. And he first appears in Acts chapter 20. After the riot has taken place in Ephesus, we hear about Tychicus, and Tychicus is from Asia Minor, so he was probably converted under Paul's ministry while Paul was in the area of Ephesus. And it's almost certain when you read Paul's letters that when he mentions Tychicus, Tychicus would have been one of the people who carried Paul's letters to their destinations. And you can work that out from some of the information we'll see a bit in Colossians. But Tychicus would have been very helpful to Paul in his ministry by doing this, by carrying the letters Paul had written to the churches. And he would have delivered, for example, a letter to the Ephesians, the letter to the church in Colossians, because that was the part of the world he was from. He was from Asia Minor, what is modern day Turkey, and that's where Ephesus and Colossae are located. They're about 120 miles apart from each other. So that would have been Tychicus's job, to go to those churches, to deliver those letters to the churches. And that wasn't just sort of Tychicus's role as a mailman, he wasn't that. That wasn't just that role. He wasn't just there to deliver letters as you get letters, as I get letters through the door, probably most every morning from the mailman. That wasn't just his job. Yes, he had to deliver the letters, but he had much more to do than just that. In the first century, there was no Royal Mail. There was no mail service that would arrive on your doorstep every day. If you were going to hand deliver letters, then you needed to be a trustworthy person. But also, he wouldn't have been there just to deliver the letter. He would have been there to also read the letter aloud to the congregations that he went to, but not only to read the letters, but to expand and explain the letters. Obviously, the churches that Paul is writing to converts to Christianity, many from outside of Judaism, many who wouldn't have no background with the Old Testament. So if there were things that needed explaining when Paul mentions the Old Testament, Tychicus could have been there to help them understand what Paul was meaning, to explain that to others, but also to answer any questions that arose from the congregation regarding the content of Paul's letter. If there was anything difficult that came up, Tychicus would have been there to explain and help the churches with that. And also to tell them, because when Paul writes Colossians, for example, he's writing it most probably from his time in prison in Rome. So Tychicus would have been there to help them understand what was going on with Paul, how Paul was getting on in prison, and to help them understand the ministry from that point onwards. So Tychicus had much more than the role of just handing a letter to the churches. He was there to read it, he was there to expand it, to explain on it, to answer any questions, to update them on what Paul was doing. And obviously, in order to do this, Tychicus had to be someone who was trusted. And so I'm going to read now from one of the places where we hear of Tychicus in the New Testament. As I said, he appears 4 times in Paul's letters, but you get the most detailed description of him in the book of Colossians. And we read in Colossians chapter 4 and verses 7 to 8 these words. Paul says of Tychicus, "He is a beloved brother, a faithful minister, a fellow servant in the Lord. I have sent him to you for this very purpose, that you may know how we are and that he may encourage your hearts." And so even from those 2 brief verses with only a few words in, we can gain and glean some things about the person of Tychicus, because Paul describes him in a number of ways there. First of all, he describes Tychicus as a beloved brother. He describes him as a beloved brother. That doesn't just mean he's a Christian. Yes, he is a Christian, but it's much more than that. He's a fellow worker with Paul in his ministry and his cause for spreading the gospel. And as someone who's been charged with, as I said, delivering these letters, that would require long journeys. If Paul is writing Colossians from his prison cell in Rome, then when Tychicus delivers these letters, he's going on a long journey. He's going from Rome to Laodicea to Colossae on a long, perilous journey. He has to cross Italy on foot. Then he would have to sail through the Adriatic Sea, and then he has to cross Greece, and then he has to cross the Aegean to get to where he's going. This is not just a simple journey. It's a long, arduous journey. And when he does that, obviously he's leaving his home, he's leaving his job, he's leaving his family, if he has family, his friends, and his own church. So this has to be someone who is beloved to Paul, someone who Paul can rely on, someone who Paul can trust to deliver these vital letters to the churches. So Tychicus he's not just a Christian, he's much more than that. He's beloved to the Apostle Paul, but Paul describes him as a faithful minister. He's someone who Paul can trust on to be a faithful minister of the gospel. And if he's going to deliver these letters to the churches, then he obviously needs to be faithful in ministry. He needs to be reliable. He needs to be dependable. Someone Paul can absolutely entrust with the importance of handing these letters over to the churches, especially when he has to deliver the gospel message to them. Because if you think about the churches that he would be delivering these letters to in Colossae, in Ephesus, to Laodicea, those churches were facing some difficult situations. They were facing many controversies, false teachers. And so Tychicus would have to deal with some of these situations. So he needs to be someone who's relied upon. That's why Paul can describe him this way, as a beloved brother, as a faithful minister. But also notice how Paul ends, and he's there to encourage your hearts. Paul has sent him there with the purpose of being an encouragement to those Christians in the churches in Asia Minor. He wants to encourage them, and he knows Tychicus is the man to do that. He was to inform the believers of Paul's situation. Many of the churches would have wondered what was going on with Paul because he's in prison. And so Tychicus, as a close friend of Paul, would know this, and he would be there to encourage the church that the gospel hasn't failed. The gospel is not bound in chains, as Paul says, but it's still spreading across the world. So Tychicus was there to encourage the churches in their faith. And so obviously this is a man who Paul deeply trusts, who he obviously finds reliable. And this is what we want to find in ourselves, don't we? We want to be people who are helpful to the church. We want to be faithful ministers. We want to be beloved brothers. We want to be people who can encourage others in the church. We want to be like Tychicus. These are great ways to describe someone in Paul's ministry. He was really helpful to Paul, even though not a lot is said about him. From these few words, we can gain a great deal. In fact, when Paul finally writes and mentions Tychicus, that's in the book of 2 Timothy. And I'm going to read that because these are some of Paul's last letters, and he's writing obviously to Timothy, who he had sent to Ephesus, the region where Tychicus was from, and Timothy was to take charge of the church there in Ephesus. But you read in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 to 13, these words. Paul writes, "Do your best to come to me soon, for Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Luke is alone with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me in ministry. Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus." And so as Paul writes these final words to Timothy, he's bringing Timothy from that church in Ephesus, and Timothy is going to come to the Apostle Paul to join him now in his ministry. But notice that he sends to that church Tychicus. He sends someone who he knows he can trust. And because he's already mentioned that he's had others desert him in his ministry. For example, he mentions Demas. Demas, he mentions in Colossians as someone who seems to be still with him in his ministry, someone who's still there, who he sends greetings from to the churches there in Colossae. But now, a few years later, when he writes to Timothy, Demas has deserted Paul. He's gone back to Thessalonica because he's in love with this present world. But who is still faithful to Paul in his ministry? It's Tychicus. And that's why he's sending him to Ephesus to take over from Timothy, because he knows he can trust this man. He knows he's a faithful minister. He knows he's a beloved brother, and he knows someone who will encourage the church there in Ephesus, someone who will be able to stand up against the false teaching that was taking place then. And so when we look at this man, even though only a little is said about him, what is said about him tells us an awful lot about him. He was someone who Paul could rely upon, someone who Paul could trust someone who is faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And ultimately, we want those things to be said about ourselves. You know, we don't want to be like Demas, who no longer could carry on with Apostle Paul, but went back into the world because he was in love with it. We want to be like Tychicus, who was faithful in his ministry. He was a beloved brother. He was someone who could encourage the church. And that's what we're all called to do as believers. We're called to be faithful in ministry. When we look at these people who Paul mentions in his greetings in the letters, they may only have a few words said about them, but we can learn a lot from them. But ultimately, we want to be encouraged by them because they were faithful in their ministry. They were faithful in what God had given them to do, even if there were only small roles. We as believers may only have small roles in the church, but we want to be faithful to what God has called us to. We want to be coming alongside other people in the church, helping them in gospel work, no matter what area of that church work is. And we want to be found to be faithful and reliable people of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I hope that is helpful to you, and I hope God's word continues to encourage us as we live our lives here on this earth. So thank you for listening, and good night, and God bless.